So this is Krayden's Right with David Krayden. Thanks for tuning in today. We've got a very exciting show. We've got the former Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Gerry Ritz, a good friend from the Prime Minister Stephen Harper days, and wish we had someone of his caliber and expertise in that job today, because it's clearly not what's happening. But Gerry and I were going to be talking about the fertilizer tariff and effective ban that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has put on fertilizer right now because it contains nitrogen, which is supposedly bad for the environment. But how is it bad for the environment? It creates greenhouse gases. It's another one of these greenhouse gas alarms. So we're going to be talking about that. Of course, what's been happening around the world. The video from Holland was absolutely fascinating. It continues. Farmers are saying not going to happen here. It's just not going to happen because the government is at war with farmers in Holland. That's where it all started. It spread throughout Europe. We've had farmers saying enough is enough in Italy and other countries around Europe. But guess what? It's also happening right here in Canada. And unfortunately, there's been very few media stories about this. And with the exception of some of the independent media, like the Western Standard, and that's who I'm reporting for today, some other independent media have touched on it. The Sun News chain has also mentioned this, but it has been very underreported, if at all, by that mainstream media, which of course has been bought off by Justin Trudeau. He pays their bills. It is state media now. It's not just CBC. It's a conglomerate of media stations out there. So without further ado, I'd like to bring former Ag Minister Gerry Ritz into this interview. Welcome, Gerry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, good morning, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for allowing this dialogue.
Well, I think it's probably the most important story, not only affecting agriculture today, but affecting Canada today. Because if this effective ban on fertilizer continues, we could be a country without food. And certainly if we can't feed ourselves, we're not going to be able to feed the world as Canada has for so long. So
well, I divide that a little bit. We export between 50 and 80% of any given commodity in Canada. So we'll always be able to feed ourselves. The problem will be, what will the quality and consistency be like? What we'll miss is the third largest contributor to our GDP, our agricultural sector, because they do export to the world. And this is the concern that the Americans have with us right along their border. That line doesn't exist when it comes to agriculture. We send products down, they process, we buy back, we buy fertilizers, including nitrogen from them. And they're starting to see all of that back and forth of the economy drivers at risk here. And that's what we're having a real problem with is Trudeau, rather than take a walk in the snow, he's gone into fantasy land here, and he's telling farmers that he's going to control their ability to run their own show. Their own economies of scale is at risk, and that's what really underscores the problems in Holland. They're telling a farmer how many cows he can have, how much land they want to take out of production to put it into green space. That'll be the next steps happening here. Fertilizer will be the beginning of a landslide on chemicals and inputs that farmers use, and use incredibly well, effectively and efficiently, and environmentally sound. We've made dramatic changes in the last decades on the way we farm. In Western Canada, we call it precision agriculture, seeding right into standing stubble and using less fertilizer than ever has been done before, but going to the micronutrients. There's very little land in Western Canada and probably Ontario, the other major heartlands, that isn't under the auspices of an agrologist, taking those soil samples, mapping what needs to be done, specifically where it needs to be done on that field. It goes up to the cloud and then sends those directions back down to your seeder, your sprayer, your combine, as to make the best and most effective use of that ground. And there's no credit for that given. The carbon sequestration that farmers do, absolutely no credit given. So this is a rush to madness with absolutely no positive gain at the end of it.
So could this escalate, though, with all this climate change madness as it escalates? Could it also include a food shortage in Canada? Are we headed for potential famine?
Well, Canada's 1.6% of the global problem, and somehow we think we can fix the whole global problem by going too far, too fast. And we've seen that with our oil and gas sector. So out here in Western Canada, we're taking this very seriously. I mean, when Trudeau starts to walk on the wild side, we know there's no stopping him. And this is the beginning of the end of sustainable agriculture in this country. As I said, farmers have made significant changes already. A lot of the guidelines that Trudeau and Bibeau have sent out, farmers are already doing, but they get no credit for it because they have to start over again in order to attain and apply for this program funding that the government's making available, which is pennies on the dollar as to what's going to actually be required.
Well, what triggered me to this and what really got me interested in this whole story is that there's been other regimes in history that have gone to war with farmers and have gone to war with agriculture for the sake of ideology and for no other rational reason. We saw it in the Soviet Union with an artificial famine in Ukraine and surrounding areas. Stalin did that only to enforce communist ideology. We saw it in China in the 1950s with the Great Leap Forward. Millions of people died because Mao was trying to industrialize China at the expense of agriculture. Do you think we could see something similar here?
Well, I don't think Canadian farmers will let it get to that extent. The farm groups have to rear up on their hind legs and start pushing back. The Fed-Prov meeting was happening in Saskatoon at the very same time Ag in Motion, probably the largest attended farm show in Western Canada, was on. They came out, toured around. It was about 90% new tech, new ways of doing agriculture that are more effective, more efficient, use less fuel, use less inputs, including fertilizer. And they all nodded and smiled and said, isn't this wonderful? Then they go back and come out with this crap. And I can't understand why my own provincial minister here in Saskatchewan hasn't been ripping her a new one. I see Ontario have written a stern letter and Alberta's mused about it, but nobody is standing up for the agricultural sector that's in peril here, simply because of ideology.
That's the question. Where are the ag groups right now? Where is the industry? Why aren't they defending farmers?
Well, they're beginning to. They just can't believe that their story isn't getting out. The problem is, as you said at the start of the interview, mainstream media have never understood agriculture, even when I was minister, 10 years ago or whatever. And they write from downtown Toronto, they write from the press gallery in Ottawa and try to understand it. And then they go and have lunch and wonder where the food came from. It came from the restaurant. It didn't come from a farmer. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a shockwave go through this country if this type of thing happens. This will be the start of a war on pesticides. We've seen this Liberal government take away strychnine, which is the only control that's viable to go after gophers and ground feeders like that can clean off a crop in no time. And they've done that with no science behind it. Trudeau made a pledge way back when he was, young and smiling and said that he was going to base all these decisions on science. There's absolutely no science that calls for this. At the same time, they're penalizing farmers. They're allowing billions of liters of raw sewage into the St. Lawrence and saying that's okay, but farmers better cut back on nitrogen.
Is this a personal thing with Justin Trudeau? I mean, why is he so committed to doing this and punishing farmers?
I think it's more a look over here. I mean, his whole reign of terror has been disastrous. You look at our economy and what he's done with that. You look at our foreign relations now. And I think this is all about turning the direction. He's a divider, not a builder. He did that with the pandemic. He's done it with COVID. He's going to continue to do it, divide people. This is a rural-urban fight. But when the grocery store shelves are empty, he'll just say, well, we'll import more. Well, that's not the answer either, because as I said, agriculture has been one of the largest drivers of the GDP in this country, and that's in peril. We've lost our food processing sector because of taxation, carbon taxes, and so on. The new fuel standard is going to hit farmers hard. It comes down to the ability of those tractors to work under load, and there hasn't been a renewable fuel that can actually meet that match yet. Canola is the closest, but even it alone won't do it.
So it would seem to me this has not only been not thought out by anybody in government, because I don't think there's an ag minister in the Trudeau government has ever understood agriculture the way you do, certainly. But you were on Tucker Carlson tonight exactly a week ago, and you were telling me before we went on air that you had tremendous response from that interview, and also you had a little problem with Twitter this week. Can you explain that?
Well, it just the timing really makes you wonder. They took offense to something I said about consultations with Ag Canada. I said you might as well hit your thumb with a hammer for all the good it would do. They're just not listening. Tucker is watching this from an American perspective, realizing the food products that go back and forth across that border on a daily basis, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And he's worried that his own left-leaning government is going to take up this type of thing. And if not, just the fallout from their major trading partner, Canada. And he's absolutely right. So we had a short discussion. He's talked about doing some more in-depth as this unfolds, and I'm happy to oblige. My invitations to spread this word across CBC, CTV, and Global must have been lost in Canada Post. I never did get them.
Probably so. And you're also saying you had some problems with Twitter this week, probably because you made a remark they didn't like.
Well, it was the 10th anniversary of Marketing Freedom. It was right on that day. They shut me down for 24 hours. And, lots of kudos coming in. Farmers aren't looking back. There's still a group out there that think I was absolutely wrong in doing what I did, but they've enjoyed the pricing and the ability to market their own crops too. The vast majority of the folks that were against the change, the friends of the wheat board, were organic growers that weren't under the wheat board to begin with. So they're sitting on their throne and dictating to what I can and cannot do. The Wayne Easters of the world and Lawrence McCauley's of the world that farm background in PEI, which isn't under it either, demanding that I, have a marketing board, but they say they don't need one. Why would I? Yeah, we got rid of it, and then nobody's looking back.
No, nobody's looking back. So you've been relatively quiet in your retirement. You went back to Saskatchewan, back to the farm, back to rural Canada. Is there a time and a place for Mr. Gerry Ritz to get back into politics, not as an elected member, but as a spokesperson for this issue, for agriculture? Because clearly we need somebody like you out there talking.
Well, the ag groups, they all got together and put me into the Canadian Agriculture Hall of Fame, the Saskatchewan Agriculture Hall of Fame. Those are fantastic, and recognizing the great work that my team did with me. But at the end of the day, they're all scared that if I speak out too much, it'll have ramifications on them. A bit of Stockholm syndrome, I think. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to stand up and holler because nobody else is going to do it for them at this juncture. Western wheat growers are the only ones I've seen that are actually speaking out in any way that's substantive. And even that's a little bit of shadow boxing as opposed to just standing up and saying, bugger off, this is my livelihood you're screwing with, that direct. And putting pressure on the provincial ministers that then band together and go after Ottawa. When they start to make these changes and it affects the bottom line of any farm across Canada, then one of the business risk programs called AgriStability kicks in with that Olympic average rolling over. So there was a study done, Myers Norris Penny's done some, there's been others that have done it as well. And they're saying the average farm in Saskatchewan would see a loss of between $35,000 and $45,000 net dollars. So that's got to be picked up by AgriStability. 40% of that is paid by the province. And every province is crying broke after the pandemic. Why would they allow 100% of the problem from the federal government and then pay 40% of the solution? I don't understand where they're not hollering. So there's lots of work to be done. I guess we all need to fly to Costa Rica in the next 2 weeks and harangue the guy on the beach because he's not here to talk to.
No. Can you see yourself, though, getting more active in this fight?
Well, we're working on solutions. I'm a director of a group called Dominion Blockchain, and what we're doing is applying blockchain technology to agriculture. And it's all about the data that farmers own and are getting no credit for it. Part of that data, major data, is carbon sequestration. So this data takes the product, follows the product on the way out, which is great for traceability. It's that final block between the actual land that it's produced on and the final buyer, say Japan, Korea, Europe, wherever it goes. And it gives them that confidence that they have that full traceability. It also then allows any monies to be generated from that because it is a bonus. It also allows carbon credits to flow backwards down that blockchain. And with this problem now with fertilizer and chemicals, it allows that data to be put into that particular crop, identified by the GPS of that land. So you know exactly what was used on it, how much was used on it, how it fared, and the results of all of that. So that's one of the things that I've been working on, and I think its time has come.
So do you think farmers in this country have got the fight in them to take this issue on? Because they've been docile over the years. They're content.
Well, I know several hundred across Canada that were never docile. Didn't matter what I did, they were in my face. and rightly so. Not every decision we made was user friendly, but at the end of the day, we set up what we called value chain roundtables on every portion and part of industry that applied to ag, and the panels. Then the chairman of those panels were my advisory group. And, we would meet once a month or whenever it was required if we were putting through a piece of legislation or going to cabinet for a change in coverage and so on. And I had the backing, those third parties out there, before I even tried to move my material. That's why the change to the wheat board actually finally came about. We had 3 of the 4 provinces involved. We had 99% of the ag groups involved because they could all see the benefit at the end. So you got to do your homework. And the government has not done their homework on what they're doing with this.
Well, I guess that was my final question, but my final observation, Gerry, is that your expertise, your knowledge, your stature is missed in this cabinet, because Trudeau obviously not only doesn't understand, he just doesn't care about this issue. I don't think he has any idea.
They literally, I was very fortunate. I had a prime minister that, his wife's family were involved in ranching. So he understood the trials and tribulations of on the ground production. He gave me a lot of rope at times. Sometimes I hung myself, but that's part of the growing up process. And at the end of the day, there's absolutely nobody in Trudeau's cabinet or caucus that has a freaking clue about what it takes to keep a farm gate viable. They just don't. Bibeau herself did economic something for the province of Quebec. I don't think she was on a farm until she finally stepped into a dairy barn at some point. She wouldn't know which end of the cow to milk, probably still doesn't. But at the end of the day, we've got what we got. So it's up to us to scream and holler. There's some tremendous people at Ag Canada. There's tremendous people at trade and so on, and they're all just tearing their hair out. They've weaponized Farm Credit Canada, one of the departments that reported to me and loans money to farmers on a far more friendly basis than banks and credit unions are sort of there as well, but banks themselves. So they've weaponized them to the point where there's a box now to check off whether or not you're following along on Trudeau's environmental scorecard, and you may or may not get your loan renewed or a loan period. So that's just not on. Those are the types of things that people really have to get upset about and really start to push back.
Amen. And thank you for pushing back, Gerry. And I want to thank you for joining us today and informing the Western Standard audience more about this issue, because believe me, they are engaged. They are concerned. So thank you, Gerry, for your time today, and God bless.
Well, thank you, David, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Take care.
So I would invite all of you who have been listening to this to follow Gerry Ritz on Twitter and Facebook. He has done some tremendous work, not only as an ag minister, and one of the best ag ministers we ever had, because he understands the issue. He understood agriculture like nobody else has since. So follow him on Twitter. Give him your support. And like I say, he is getting followers like he hasn't had in a long time, because he's speaking out about this issue, and Canadians are very concerned. So I want to encourage you to do that. Want to thank those who we used their video today, including Salman Salmi and Keenan Bext and the Genova Reporter, and for the fantastic footage we were using today, because believe me, this is a most visual story, and what's happening around the world is being captured, but you're not seeing it on Canadian news very much, and we need to change that. So I encourage you to get informed about this. If you're in agriculture, fight back. You need to fight back, because this is affecting your livelihood, your life, your family, your legacy. All Canadians have to get involved with this, because as you just heard the former minister say, this is going to get worse, not better. And we could be looking at food shortages in this country. And certainly, at the very least, we're not going to have an agricultural industry that can export food anywhere to anyone around the world. And that's probably the least that can happen. But even if that is the only thing that happens, that's devastating, catastrophic for the agriculture industry in Canada, which most people don't even know is one of the largest and most important, significant industries we have in this country. And it's always been undersold, underrepresented, except when people like Gerry are there. So thank you for joining us today. Continue to read my columns on the Western Standard. Just about every day I have a new one up there. I'm fighting for these issues, but the Western Standard is there because it's an independent media source, unlike the state media at CBC and the subsidized media at CTV Global and other mainstream media. And my goodness, the Toronto Star is there, the Globe and Mail, these are all subsidized. And these are all newspapers that are not telling you all the facts. So my parting words, thanks for listening today. We'll be with you again shortly with more news that is of interest and relevance to you that you need to hear. So keep up the fight, and God bless.